Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program from Planet Word. I'm Rebecca Roberts. I am the curator of programming at Planet Word. We are a new museum of words and language in Washington, D.C. That's it in the Zoom background behind me at the corner of 13th and K. If you found out about this program because you're a member of Planet Word, thank you so much for that support. We are a free museum. We want to stay a free museum, and membership is a huge way that we're able to do that. If you found out about this from a friend or from a link somewhere else and you want to know more about the museum or considering supporting us for membership, planetwordmuseum.org is the link. So with that said, let me introduce Halim. Halim Flowers, gosh, he's an artist, he's a poet, he's an advocate, he's a performer, he's a writer. He is somebody who makes his living with words in a lot of different ways. And has a unique story for how he got there and what words have meant to him. He and I met about a year ago, and I've wanted to get him involved with Planet Word since then. So I'm delighted to introduce you all to Halim Flowers. Halim, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, I talk to a lot of people who play with words, writers and narrators and poets and visual artists. And a lot of people are exploring the kind of beauty and joy of words, but I think none of them quite have as much at stake as you have had. The first time you and I met, you told me that you felt like words saved your life, and that is, you've never been defined by your story, but I want people to understand it so that they know where you came from. So, tell us, you grew up here in DC, and tell us how you ended up going to prison at 16.
One word, when you think about like life, and in one way it can be like celebrated, it could mean like, birth, introduction into a new world, but in the criminal legal system, which plays a heavy part in the lives of people who are socially constructed as Black and poor in the class spectrum. The mass incarceration system, Washington, D.C., had the highest incarceration rate of any city in the world for like over 20 years. And for me, growing up as a child during the crack era, and a child who did sell crack cocaine, from the age of 12, because in America, we're taught to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And when you socially constructed as Black and poor, whether it's historically or contemporarily, more times than not, you're beginning with no boot or strap to begin with. So whether during my era, either you was a rapper, this new form of artistic expression that wasn't accepted until it became commercially, viable to be such. And you had crack cocaine, and you had these two births of these two industries, that really had a huge impact upon my life, because what hip hop rap was doing, it was telling my story, what I saw in Washington, D.C. as a child, losing the community to crack cocaine addiction and gun violence. D.C. having the highest murder rate of any city in America, in my formidable years. So, and just, starting to sell drugs at the age of 11, assimilating into that lifestyle where we resolve our disputes through gun violence. And ultimately that just led to me affiliating myself with people in a lifestyle that led to me getting 2 life sentences at the age of 16, not for shooting anyone, just with being with someone who the law enforcement said that I was with him when he shot and killed someone. And my refusal to cooperate with the government to prosecute another child caused me to get a life sentence. I went to trial. I was convicted as an aid and abettor under the accomplice liability of felony murder, and just was given 2 life sentences.
And you weren't jailed as a juvenile. You were put in adult prison at 16.
Yeah, at 16, yes.
Were you into the rap scene as an artist before that, or did you just listen to the music? When did you start rapping yourself?
Well, my childhood friend, Mamadou Stewart, I know a lot of people may be familiar with him because Kim Kardashian helped him get released from prison. We were childhood friends since we were 6 years old, and we all came up listening to rap music in the 80s, but Mamadou is a rapper. He would rap all the time. And just through being around him, I just started like freestyle rapping, you know, because my granddad, he was like trying to make me a jazz player, but that wasn't my you know. So, and just through being around Mama Lou, freestyle rapping. And then one guy, he met us one time and tried to get us to like write songs. He wanted to sign us, but we just was too heavy into the streets then to be still to like write songs. And what I know now is just like the universe was preparing me for like moments like this, to where as though I can just speak impromptu, don't have to prepare or anything like that, can just artistically put my ideas together, articulate them in a poetic way. And that's pretty much just like what hip hop was indoctrinating us with. It was informing us and grooming us to be able to tell our story at the drop of a hat in a way that's captivating and paradigm shifting, you know. And I think that's why I've been successful as an artist, because of that.
And, you know, I mean, obviously rap is poetry. It's not like you moved from rap to poetry. They're the same thing, but you started defining yourself a little bit more as a poet and less as a rapper. When did that happen?
I was incarcerated in 1997. At the beginning of my incarceration, Blowback Productions started filming this documentary titled Thug Life in DC, which was aired on HBO and won an Emmy Award. So when this documentary aired, like in 98, 99, a young lady, she wrote me, and I was at the beginning of like maybe like 2 years into my life sentences, and she was just she was just like beautiful, you know, just the way she wrote. I knew that she was beautiful. I didn't have to see her, and I just was so blown away with the way she articulated her words on paper. And she told me that she was a poetess and she did slam poetry, and I just lied and it was like, I do poetry too, because I just wanted to
girl.
And when you know, I didn't come from society with girlfriends. So in order to like get women to send you pictures and come see you, you have to be very nice with the words, you know. So, and she was that she gave me that seed funding that I need to blossom into poetry, and I'm forever grateful to her for that.
You ultimately were instrumental in your own release. There was a law that was allowing current people sentenced to life to revisit their sentences, but it wasn't retroactive. How did you get involved in that advocacy thing while you were still in prison?
Well, I started studying this issue with children getting charged as adults in the criminal legal system in 2004, when the Roper versus Simmons case was being litigated in the U.S. Supreme Court about juveniles under the age of 18 getting the death penalty. So, and through becoming a jailhouse lawyer, you have to learn Latin. And when you start to study Latin, you start to know the etymology of English words, and that makes you more effective as a poet, because a poet, especially a poet who's socially constructed as a man in the world, we're taught as men or males or boys to suppress how we feel. And what a poet job is to tap into their feelings and their emotions and to find the right words that you can use in a strategic and a creative way, sometimes with rhythm and sometimes not, that you can use to resonate with other people's emotions, which is hard for men, because like a lot of men, we're just taught to suppress. And that's why I notice, like when I use these words, a lot of men say that you're expressing what I feel, but I just can't get it out. And so for me, just like tapping into those words, I learned the spirit or the energy behind words. And I was able to, once the law was introduced in DC, and I found out about it and they was having a public hearing, I emailed the mayor and all of the city councilmen, shared with them my story, but let them know that my story was no exceptional story or no isolated situation. It was hundreds of young Black boys in the District of Columbia in the late 80s and 90s who were still serving life sentences for offenses that were committed when they were under the age of 18. And this was like in 2016 when the hearing took place. So 3 councilwomen, Murray Che, Brianna Dowd, and Elisa Silverman, they emailed me back. They were concerned. They said they were not aware that it was children still serving life sentences from the 80s and 90s. And they said that they found it to be true that they would amend the legislation during the markup process. So I had a wonderful lady named Allison Horn, who read my testimony at the hearing before the city council. And through my testimony and so many other people, we were able to get the bill amended and legislated and enacted in 2017, April. And then I was released from that law in March 21st, 2019.
So you're coming up on 2 years free.
Yes.
And just because it went by pretty quickly, that's called the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act. People are curious about that history of legal reform. So, just now you said about a case, a Supreme Court case that you watched where someone was sentenced to death. Mm-hmm. Talked about you being sentenced to life. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you talked about life, outside of prison, meaning beginnings and birth. Mm-hmm. How do you think about those words, life and death, now?
Right now, my current obsession is physics. And so, whatever your current obsession is, it kind of dominates your thought pattern. And for me, understanding that energy and matter cannot be created nor destroyed in a scientific sense. And I believe like everything is just vibrations and frequencies and thoughts and emotions. We just attract what we are more than what we want. So when I think about life and death, especially in light of these, I always speak about these 5 social constructions that filter our whole experience in America: race, class, gender, creed, sexuality. And most of us, what I've found since I've been in society, especially now being a visual artist who have the opportunity to have relationships with people who are up on a higher spectrum of class, they are more confined, oftentimes people who we consider rich or wealthy, or just people in society. We're more confined and mass incarcerated by these 5 constructs, from being our authentic self, more than people that are in chains physically. So when I think about life and death, there's so many people who have the breath of life to live and maybe will be considered free in society, but they're spiritually and mentally dead because they have to, whether it's because of their colleagues, their career, their loved ones, they have to suppress who they really want to be. And when you're not liberated to be, unapologetically the true self that your self is calling you to be, that's a form of slow death. And for me, I feel like I was free way before I was liberated from the physical prison. Once I understood the dynamic of love and how to effectively love myself and to be myself authentically and be transparent, because it doesn't make me vulnerable. It just makes me who I am. And this is who I am. I accept myself, and I'm open to other people who may don't want to accept my truth, accept my reality. It's okay. I love them too. And just having the strength to love and to be myself, I was liberated. And once I was liberated, I knew that I would attract the physical freedom, because we can only attract what we really are more than what we really want. So that's my over intellectualized way of saying what life and death means to me at this moment.
I mean, I'm trying to get inside your head. So there's no such thing as an over intellectualized. I mean, I wonder if you know how that transformation happened in you. Like, you grew up a lot, right? You were there 22 years. You went in a kid, you came out a man. But you also seem to have leaned into some ideas that you hadn't been exposed to, in Ward 6. But you also were the kind of person who embraced those ideas and wanted to know more. So how do you think that transformation happened in you?
For me, you have to understand, I'm someone who took my pre-SATs when I was 11, always tested high on the highest percentiles, always been very cerebral, always academic and intelligent. But growing up in a culture with a social construct of the gender, of a boy and the race being Black and class being poor, what was celebrated in my village, because at that time when I was a teenager, Hillary Clinton, she wrote a book titled "It Takes a Village," while in the same breath was resonating with this frequency that was calling young Black boys fatherless, godless, and jobless super predators. And so I was in a village that didn't celebrate academic intelligence in boys. It celebrated material acquisition and violence. And for me, what I did, I suppressed that part of myself. And then once I was incarcerated, I'm not going to say it was just the process of incarceration, because the penal system is very inhumane. I think it just was a part of me suffering. Suffering breeds like empathy. And what I saw was that really no one cared about me. That was like the spark that I needed, besides my mother. And I realized, like, I gave up my whole academic career to sell drugs and get these cars or clothes to impress people who really didn't care about me. So I'm gonna go back to being my nerdy, geeky self, and see where it takes me, just being myself. So that was like the foundation of my transformation. But going back to the words, I had great mentors in prison, along with my mother working at the Library of Congress, who had access to all the copyrights ever in that building. So when I wanted literature, she could just copy it for me. And then, she would send me books. But I had great mentors who just like introduced me to these books, like As a Man Thinketh, Think and Grow Rich, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, the writings of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Malcolm X. I mean, I remember one mentor told me, he said, every time I see you, I want to see you with a book in your hand. And I want you to read everything, even if it's a gardening magazine. He said, I guarantee you, later on in life, you will look back and you would say it paid off. And it did, because what it did was it exposed like some of the limitations of growing up in DC, which is a very segregated city along the lines of race and class. I realized that my reality, my experience going in there at the age of 16 and not understanding the full spectrum of not just the world, but the city that I lived in. And books, they civilized me. They introduced me to people, places, and things and ideas that I realized my parents and their parents couldn't pass down to me, because they lived during the times of segregation. So they couldn't physically go to these places, right? So and books opened me up to things like that. And just like always tell people, like reading the Wall Street Journal every day, not about stocks and bonds, but about the world, about cuisine and about art and about traveling and wines and cheese. And it was giving me a more cosmopolitan outlook on life. And it just was like a gradual transformation. And that led me to be here today.
The city that you were released into was a different place, right? I mean, especially your childhood neighborhood out Hill East, that place is gentrifying so fast. Did you find a different world?
Definitely. The infrastructure, just not in my neighborhood, but just in the city. And if you're taught to see people along the lines of race, then sometimes we can make synonymous gentrification with the racial classification of white. But I don't see people along those lines. And I know that what's most important is class. Like I just did a self-portrait last night, and one of the things I put was like super predator, self-made millionaire, immune to gentrification. And what this means is that someone like myself who was able to take talents and make money, and it makes you immune to certain things like gentrification, because you can't be displaced because you can afford it. So yeah, it changed if you see things along the color lines, but at the end of the day, it's just an infusion of money, and the people who can't afford, the prices, and they can't stay, and that changes the complexion. of the community, and not the racial complexion, but the more financial complexion. And you know, that's what I return to. And for me, as an artist, I spend more time in Georgetown now than in my own neighborhood. But you know, it's interesting. You know, it's interesting. And for me, I just that's why one of my passions is economics, because I want people to see, like, I'm very big on reparations. That's a word that's big to me, economic reparations, because we have a reality where people in our city who are socially constructed as Black have 10 to 81 times less median household net worth than those who are socially constructed as white. And I don't think it's because they're any less intelligent or lazier. I just think it's like systemic biases in place that have historically kept people economically suppressed, and that drastically affect outcomes on their life that leads to intergenerational literacy and poverty, especially when the schools are funded along the lines of real estate or ad valorem tax. And those who could pay the highest ad valorem tax get the best schools. So just some of the things that I paint about. But you know, I'm very grateful to be alive today, and to be an artist, and to have had 22 years to invest in reading a lot of dope subjects that I think that can be used to infuse a more loving outlook in our city, in our country, in our planet, you know. And if we fly to Mars with Elon Musk, and then in the universe, we're gonna take the love all the way to Mars in the Tesla, a flying one.
I think you froze for a second.
Good. You can hear me?
So someday, yeah.
Say they can hear me.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've been spending time in Georgetown. Some of that is your affiliation with the Halcyon Arts Lab. How did that all come about? I think a lot of people aren't familiar with Halcyon, so tell us about that.
When I was at the end of serving my life sentences, I was sent to a high security federal prison in the desert of California. And while I was there, this was like right after the law changed. As soon as the law changed, within 3 days, instead of keeping me closer to DC, they sent me from West Virginia to California. And I think that was like a form of like punishing me for being so vocal for the legislative reform. But I was cool. The weather was nice. And I subscribed to this magazine called Capital File magazine, because I wanted to become more abreast on what was going on locally in DC. And they had an article about Dr. Sachiko Kuno and Kate Goodall, the two founders of the Halcyon organization. And they mentioned the Halcyon Arts Lab fellowship that was starting that year. And as soon as I read the article, I knew, I was like, is this a fellowship about artists who use their creativity in the interest of social equity? I said, I can do this, you know, and I wrote them a letter, and I let them know about my situation, that I was doing life in prison, and that I would be home soon, and I would be honored to have the opportunity to be a Halcyon fellow. So, you know, as energy and vibrations had it, I was released in 2019, right, like within 2 weeks when they was filing the applications for the third cohort. And I did the application, and I was able to get it. And they gave me my first spoken word paid performance through Jessica Stafford Davis at the By the People Festival with Hank Willis Thomas and his For Freedom's barge on the water. And just two institution and two women, along with the other women who worked there, like Nicole Dowd and Aisha White, that just invested in me and wasn't afraid of me, because society does so much in making people afraid of Black men, especially Black men coming from prison after serving decades. And they just gave me that seed funding. They gave me housing, studio space, and connections. And, you know, that's what I needed, you know, to blossom into an artist. And one of the inside jokes at Halcyon was that I used to always say I'm just a janitor in training, because I didn't feel like a real artist because I wasn't doing visual art. And they helped me to push me towards, you know, becoming who I am today.
You're not kidding that you read everything. You might you're the only person to read a glossy society gossip magazine in prison.
Yeah, I love Capital Foul.
Um, so you did a lot of spoken word, but you told me recently you've kind of gone away from that. That we can see behind you, you've got a lot of visual art these days. But what led you to pick up a paintbrush the first time?
Everyone who knows me know I'm like a huge Jay-Z fan, and listening to Jay-Z, I kept hearing him rap about Basquiat. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I thought, I thought maybe he was talking about some shoes or some clothes or some island in Italy somewhere. And one day, an article came out in the Wall Street Journal about Basquiat, and I saw him. It wasn't even his eye; I just saw his face, and I was just amazed that someone who was socially constructed as Black could receive so much praise in the art world. And that got me to start reading the articles about Rembrandt and Picasso and all the other visual artists. So I made a vow that when I come home, I would go see his works and study his works. And I did. I came out 2019, went to the museums all over the country, got the chance to see his works up close, documentaries about him. So when the quarantine came in March, my wife and I had went to Halcyon to get like some stuff from there because the arts lab was going to be shut down. So on our way back, my wife was like, we was like right there by Planet Word, and she was like, let's stop in the art store and get some paint to have something to do during the quarantine. And I was like, cool, So I already had a philosophy in my mind. I just had to figure out how to paint it, and that's how I started in March, not knowing anything about paint at all, and just started painting and just kept going with it. And now that I'm obsessed with visual art language, I'm just not enthusiastic about spoken word performances right now. It takes a lot of memorization, and it takes a lot. Painting takes a lot too, but it's different. It's different.
We've got
word requires more.
Yeah, we got some slides of your work that I want to share and have you talk us through them. But I want to remind everyone, we do want to hear your questions too. Put them in the Q&A box, and we will definitely be asking them. So let me share my screen here so that we can see some of the work. And I absolutely appreciate that you have included a picture of your incredible daughter here. I don't even know how you go about having a baby during a pandemic, but those are questions for another time. But congratulations on your beautiful baby girl.
Thank you.
So tell me what we're looking at here.
What's free was this painting was inspired by like a song that Meek Mill has. Someone who was a rap artist who had his run-in with the criminal legal system, especially with probation and parole, and has a reform organization. And Jay-Z has like a famous verse on that song that had a lot of ripple effect. And but for me, it's just like, you always hear like we are, like Obama was the leader of the free world, and this is the free world and the shining city on the hill. But you have this cruel contrast where we have the most people in chains in the world, and we have the highest GDP, but where nothing is free. Everything is like has a price, but people don't know the difference between price and value, and just how this whole, just class system, commodifies everything, even love, so it's just like a rhetorical question, like what's really free in the land of the free, where over millions of people are in chains and not free, and even more millions of people are drowning in poverty, so yeah, it's just like a rhetorical question or statement. Oh, this piece right here is my MAGA piece. You see people with the MAGA hats, Make America Great Again. We started with President Reagan, and then Trump picked it up. So for me, my whole movement is about like love, and I'm not beholden by any political parties or candidates. I'm just fighting for love. And agape is a word that I embrace a lot. It's a Latin word with Christian undertones, but it's Latin, and it means like unconditional, the highest form of love. So for me, and then on the painting, you know, those three statements are statements from James Baldwin about the artist's greatest responsibility is to teach the government, the world, the society on how to love. So I think for us, especially in this time, the day before the inauguration, I think a lot of people, half of the country is excited, half is disappointed. And I just would like to see us all come to a place where we can love each other. And I'm very optimistic that we can love each other better and work towards this outcome each day along these dividing political lines, you know, that's very volatile right now.
Yeah. James Baldwin, another one of your heroes.
Yeah.
I can see the Picasso influence here.
Yeah, like I said, I've been studying physics and mathematics lately. So the 440 hertz is like when you study like the frequencies and vibrations is one of the vibrations that's known to create healing and soothness and love and then like, you know, it's a big deal. And then you have the 432 hertz inside of the heart. But a lot of people, the big thing was like about the stimulus, what would be $2,000 or $6, and now Biden said it'd be $1,400. But for me, like love is a stimulus, because money can fix temporary needs, but if we don't get to the root of the problem, that is one way or another, it's over 70 million people on both sides that's not feeling, you know, loved and heard and seen, then we're going to continue to have this contentious situation every 4 years. It's always going to be, this is the most important election of our lifetime.
I'm looking in the lower left corner here. Do you sign your name in Arabic?
Yeah.
How did that start?
Well, you know, I was born Muslim, and Halim is an Arabic name. And while I was incarcerated, I studied Arabic, grammar extensively, and you know, as well as Spanish as well. But I can read and write Arabic pretty good. I just don't do conversational. But for me, when you study it, it goes back to my love of mathematics. It's like learning different languages. I don't know. I think I'm good at it because it's like the conjugation of verbs is like mathematical algebraic equations. You know. So me, I always just sign my name that way though.
I think we are just learning the tiny tip of things you studied while you were incarcerated. I think we have, quite an impressive range. We actually have a question. Who's Miss Libe says, you mentioned etymology when you were talking about having to learn Latin and word roots, which is an area of linguistics I'm obsessed with. Can you tell us an interesting etymology you've discovered?
The interesting etymology I discovered was radical, right? When you hear the word radical, I went through like this phase in my studies where I was like studying Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and Patrice Lumumba, people like consider like radical revolutionaries. And I recently had sold a painting to a couple, and the painting has radical love revolution on it. And they was asking me like, you know, radical, how does radical and love and revolution go together? And one of the interesting things, like you see the media use like radical. And the root word, the etymology of radical actually means rooted, right? And it doesn't mean like radical Islamist or radical communist or radical in a violent type of way. So for me, it's just like seeing a word like that I believe is an important word. I believe we need to be rooted in love for ourselves and others, ourselves first and foremost. So it was interesting to see that how that word is used, and etymology is interesting, you know.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So in all of these paintings that we're looking at, you use words, sometimes symbols and numbers as well. I see in this one, you've positioned words in different sort of
Right.
unexpected ways.
Like that word in that left leg is upside down, a Havet Shinam, which is a Jewish terminology in Hebrew, which means like unconditional love, like gracious, compassionate, strong love. So for me, it's just like, how do I find love within myself in all the other cultures of the world, and not just like a Black or American experience, and transfer this vibration to the canvas of love. And that's why you see, like in this painting, the 11th harmonic is like a musical, a mathematical, and a musical or frequency vibration that's been known to cause healing as well. So it's like just taking all of this stuff and transferring energy, and that's all painting is just transferring energy.
Yeah, it's
Through
also
colors and imagery, and yeah.
It looks like there are some newspaper front pages embedded in here too.
Yeah, to the left is the 2 pages from the Wall Street Journal the day after the insurrection on the Capitol. And so you see like Biden and Trump and people were storming the Capitol. And then to the right, actually the day before, I was helping my grandfather move. And outside his house, it was an old newspaper from 1971 that he was throwing away, was on the ground. And I saw like a tribute to a prophet and about the original last poets. And as a poet, that stuck out to me. And I said, let me grab this historical artifact that was talking about Malik El-Haj Shabazz and the last poets, and put this on in contrast to something that's happening today over 40 years later. 40 years later, it's 2021. So I think it's like, no, 50 years later.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I've also seen you've written a lot of poetry across front pages of newspapers.
Right.
Sometimes that have images of you as you were going through your trial and being incarcerated, and sometimes that have headlines that have something that resonates with you. Newspapers are now a little bit obsolete, right? They're a little bit of an old-fashioned medium. Why is that a source of words or visuals that matters to you?
I think it ties into like what I'm learning about physics with Albert Einstein, the general theory of relativity, and how we see things as being relevant or archaic is relative to what position we see them from. And when you're incarcerated, newspapers are extremely relevant when you don't have access to the internet and Google and smartphones, right? So, for me, when we would go through institutional lockdowns for months at a time, and they would cut the TVs off and we couldn't come out and use the phone. And I'm all the way in California, so my mother writes me a letter. It takes a week to get there, but I can get my newspaper every day, Monday through Saturday, and I can be informed of what's going on in the world, from technology and economics and wars and, so many different things. So newspapers are so very important to people who are incarcerated, who still have no access to things that we take for granted, like the internet and smartphones and Google and Bing. And so, even today, I still get the newspaper and read the newspaper every day. And now I can take it and make artwork out of it. And I think that's just, it's just a part of me. I've read the newspapers for so long. And it was a great experience. And I never think of it not being relevant, because it's so relevant to the people who I left behind. And to have the opportunity to incorporate that into artwork, because newspapers are historic relics, and to be able to put that in my paintings. And if your art lives hundreds of years from now, people can be able to see that and reference, even if there's no more paper newspapers anymore, 50, 40 years from now. I think it'd be pretty dope just to see that on a body of artwork.
They're also quite striking visually, in a way that the website isn't. They've got interesting fonts and layout and colors, and they're just
Right.
a, sort of interesting thing to look at in addition to everything else. I am going to stop sharing. thank you for sending along those slides of your art, because I know that you are producing fast and furiously, and you've got a gallery show coming up in New Orleans in a couple months.
Yes, in New Orleans, it'll be my second solo show at the Stella Jones Gallery, March 1st, but the opening March 6th. So just excited, to be able to show. And outside of that, my works are currently at DTR Modern Galleries in Palm Beach, Boston, New York City, and Washington, D.C., in Georgetown.
And, looking at the body of work that you've created in all these different media, it seems to me that words are the kind of through line, right? There's words in everything, but I always assumed it was just English words. I didn't know that you had also studied Arabic and Spanish, and there's some Hebrew in there. How do you feel about the differences among languages in terms of what you're trying to express?
It's interesting because, like, I also study like economics. So,
which is its own language.
Right. And then when you learn about like this war ideologies between capitalism and socialism or communism, you're dealing with Adam Smith, who spoke in English, and you're dealing with Karl Marx, who wrote in German, and then you study philosophy, you study Friedrich Nietzsche. So, when you read these different works, they use terminology, even like I'm an entrepreneur, that's a French word, So I'm a Muslim. Some people say I go to a mosque, it's a French word. So, I mean, just the beauty of language, right? This planet of words that we live in, it's just so amazing. And what I learned so much is that even though like it takes me back to the Tower of Babel, where people was trying to climb up in the different languages, and even though we have different languages, the spirit of them are the same. And I remember I read a book by a Japanese scientist he wrote a book about how ice crystals are formed when you freeze water, and if you put pure water inside of containers and you take certain words to the container, it impacts the formulation, the aesthetic of the ice crystal. So if you take a word like murder or kill or hatred, and you take a word like love, gratitude, and no matter what language you do it in, the word with the negative that's negative will make distorted ice crystals. And the words with love, no matter what language it was in, it would make like beautiful, aesthetically pleasing ice crystals. And then he did it with different music. So like words carry vibrations, and words free me because I it's that love word. And studying different languages and learning about whether it's marhaba in Arabic or amor in Spanish and love in English, and all of these different languages that have different words for love, and some languages have multiple words for love, right? And just that word right there, and then using that word, that emotion, that vibration, that frequency as a foundation in my life, to keep me humble, to keep me always willing to forgive, to be compassionate, and to be genuine with it, right? And approaching the world inside of my internal ecosystem with that desire, and then allowing it to emanate from without. It's been the most liberating experience for me, and that's just what I want to share. And the only way I can connect with people globally is through learning their languages and learning their heroes, and learning their culture. So, and it helps being a nerd because I have
you're among friends here, Halim.
I have a thirst, an insatiable thirst. I think being a nerd is like you have an insatiable thirst, hunger for that which you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And you realize the more that you learn, how much you don't know. And that keeps you humble.
So do you think when you're, a nerd or a brain or however you describe it, if you've got that curiosity and desire to learn new things and words come easily to you, it's a gift. Of course, it's a gift. Not that you haven't worked at it, but is it also a responsibility? Do you feel like you need to use that talent in the service of others?
Um, I think when you really understand the dynamic of love and how we're all interconnected in the planet and in the universe, um, you understand that love is like an obligation and a duty. And because to not love anything else is to not love yourself because you're connected to it. And that's what goes back to studying physics. I may look at between me and this computer screen as nothing but air is a property. And it has nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and other dissolved gases. And it's all connected, you know. So when you start to connect with sentient and insentient beings in that deep understanding of connectivity, interconnectedness, then you understand that if you have an obligation and a duty to love yourself, then loving yourself is loving everyone else. So if you really want to serve others, serve yourself with love. And then you can't do nothing, you can do no thing but emanate that. But when you're hurt, you harm. And when you heal, you heal. So and that's just, I just experienced that. Being in prison was so beautiful because you're in so close, confined quarters with so many different personality types. And you get to understand the science of people and how they think and how they feel and how it impacts what they say and what they do in the formulation of their habits and attitudes. And once you can understand that, you can empathize. Because when you've been hurt and you have harmed others, then once you are healed, you can no longer look at someone who was hurt and harming in a condescending way, because you can relate to them, you know. And a lot of people are just hurting, you know, and it don't matter whether they smoking drugs or carjacking people or committing suicide. People can do a lot of things, especially people with money. They can mask it more, but hurt is hurt and harm is harm. And I'm just so thankful that I was able to heal, and with that, I'm just feel like it's an obligation for me to use whatever gifts I have to heal. But I can't put up I can't do anything mechanical. I can't even.
You're not the guy to call when my car's broken down.
Nah. So it balances out, you know.
Yeah, know your strength.
Yeah, it balances out.
We have a question about advocacy. You mentioned economic reparations. Are you also involved in criminal reform advocacy?
I mean, like, I think when people think about like advocacy for criminal legal reform, I am an ambassador with Represent Justice, which is a prison reform, criminal legal reform national organization. But for me, it's like, that's formal advocacy. But for me, it's like every day, 4 or 5 people might call me from prison, talking to them, you know, giving them hope, sending them money, sending them pictures. That's what's more important to me. Opportunities like this to use my story to make people to learn more about that super predators are really not these dragons that's going to come out of prison and breathe fire on the whole civilization. It's a good thing. But for me, it's the things that are not seen, you know, and I think that form of advocacy is more important to me. You know, the guys that I left behind, who are locked down right now because of COVID. Some guys are not coming out for nothing but like 20 minutes, 3 days a week just to take a shower. They can't use the phone. And to be able to send them pictures of me in Mexico and Palm Beach, what we call it in prison is like taking them out there, you know, so they're in this cage in this cell and they can't go anywhere, but if they can get a picture and see someone who was just in there with them, who was serving life with them, who's living a legal and a moral life, who's a husband, who's a father, who's a homeowner, and an entrepreneur successfully, it gives them hope. It gives them light, you know, in a dark space. So to me, that's the strongest form of advocacy, because like it's people out here who, you know, get with these organizations and advocate, but they have family members that they never write a letter to, never send a picture to, never send money to. And that's kind of like weird to me, you know, when you have your own people who you love and love you, never see you, never get anything from you, but you use these social media platforms and things of this nature to aid with some form of advocacy when you're not really like directly impacting the people that, that know you and love you the most.
And now that you're a dad,
Mhm.
what do you want for her? What world do you want her to inherit that you might not have had?
I want her to know what my parents taught me, to love yourself. I remember my mother used to always tell me to never say hate, never say you hate anyone, anything. And I want her to know, like, no matter what condition you find in the external world, whether you are blessed to be a child who grew up in the Louvre and Tate Modern and Guggenheim and all these different places because your dad is an artist and, is not poor and things of that nature. Or you find yourself inside of a cage doing a life sentence as a child. Um, you always have a responsibility to love yourself. And you can't be determined internally by your external circumstances. And it's going to be uh, it's going to be a vibe in the world that's going to convince you to be everybody else but yourself. But you have a duty and an obligation to be your authentic self and to love the hell out of yourself. And you are the only one who had the responsibility to believe in yourself. My mother loved me more than anybody ever loved me. But when I told her what I was going to do when I came home, I remember she told me right before that she wished that I would get into HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. I'm like, Mom, that's not my vision. But she loved me and she loved me. She just couldn't see my vision. So it wasn't her responsibility to believe in my vision. That's my responsibility. And that's one thing I want my daughter to know, regardless of the external realities of the world, you have a direct obligation and duty to love the hell out of yourself unapologetically and to allow that to be your foundation to operate through changing the world. Because if you love yourself unapologetically and you can have the courage to be transparent about who you are in a world that praises authenticity, then you have already changed the world, because anyone who you impact will be affected.
And I think that is a perfect place to end. Halim Flowers, thank you so much for joining us. It's just been a treat to get to talk to you for an hour.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you. Look forward to being in the museum when it opens up.
Thank you so much for being here. Stay safe. Good night.